In the Wyoming mountains, a former Navy SEAL drove alone through the worst snowstorm of the season. Nate Bryce thought the night would only bury roads, not lead him back to the pain he had spent years avoiding. Then his headlights caught a pickup overturned below Black Fir Pass. No driver answered from the ravine, but a wounded German shepherd was still there, refusing to leave. On its frozen collar, Nate saw only 3 worn letters. Tal. When he whispered, "Talon?" the dog lifted his head as if the right stranger had finally arrived. Stay with this story, share where you're watching from, and please like and subscribe to help us reach 5,000 subscribers so we can keep telling stories of loyalty, courage, and second chances. In the Wyoming mountains, winter did not arrive like a season. It came like an old ruler returning to a forgotten kingdom, laying a white hand over every roof, every fence post, every narrow road that dared climb toward the clouds. By late December, the pines along Black Fir Pass stood bent beneath snow, solemn as monks in frozen robes. The ravines below the road disappeared beneath mist and blowing powder, so that a man could look down and feel he was staring into the mouth of a sleeping giant. Nathaniel Bryce knew that road better than he knew most people. At 52, most folks called him Nate, unless they wanted something official from him. He was a big man, broad through the shoulders, built with the hard economy of someone who had spent half his life carrying weight, and the other half pretending he no longer felt it. His face was long and weathered, with a slightly crooked bridge to his nose and pale gray-blue eyes that seemed to measure distance before emotion. His hair, brown once, had faded into ash and silver at the temples. A few days of stubble always shaded his jaw, not from style but from the simple fact that shaving felt like one more conversation with a mirror. He lived alone in a small rented house near the county maintenance yard, a place with a sagging porch, a stubborn heater, and a view of the mountains that would have made a painter weep, and a practical man check the insulation. Nate was practical. He kept his boots beside the door, toes facing out. He kept canned soup in rows. He kept one chair at the kitchen table, though the table had room for 4. The second chair had been pushed against the wall 3 years ago after his wife Elise left. He had never moved it back. He did not hate her for leaving. That would have been easier, and Nate had learned that life rarely handed a man the easiest burden. Elise had stayed longer than most people would have. She had stayed through the sleepless months, through the silences that filled rooms heavier than shouting, through the way Nate could sit across from her at dinner and somehow be 1,000 miles away. She had once told him, very softly, "I can love a fire, Nate, but I cannot keep warming my hands over ashes that insist they are still burning." He had not answered then. He had been good at not answering. The old war in him did not announce itself with drama. It came in small betrayals. A truck engine growling too close behind him on a dark road could make his hand clamp around the steering wheel until his knuckles paled. Red lights flashing through snowfall could pull him out of the present for 2 or 3 seconds, long enough for his breath to forget the mountain air and remember dust, heat, and orders shouted too late. Wind screaming through a ravine could become another sound entirely, one buried under years of discipline and denial. Nate never spoke of the ambush, not to Elise. Not to Marin, his grown daughter, whose messages he answered with sentences so short they looked like receipts. Not to the county therapist he had visited twice and then avoided with the tactical skill of a man evading enemy surveillance. He carried the memory the way some men carried a pocket knife, always there, always closed, always capable of opening at the wrong moment. By winter, Nate worked nights for the county road department, driving a snowplow through the high passes while the rest of the town slept under quilts and the hopeful lies of weather reports. His main route was Black Fir Pass, a narrow mountain road that curled along the cliffs north of town. On clear days, the view was grand enough to make tourists stop in the middle of the lane and take photographs. On storm nights, it was a white tunnel with no mercy and no sense of humor. Nate preferred it that way. People expected less conversation from a man inside a plow. At 9:17 that evening, the radio cracked to life in the county maintenance bay. "Bryce, you awake over there?" Nate stood beside his plow, checking the hydraulic lines under the yellow overhead lights. He wore his old olive-drab combat shirt beneath a county-issued winter jacket. The shirt fit close through the chest and shoulders, its camouflage sleeves worn pale at the elbows, faint horizontal bands crossing the upper arms. It was not a costume to him, it was just one of the few things he owned that still held its shape. He picked up the radio. "I'm here." Denny Ashcroft's voice came through clean, flat, and irritated, as if every snowflake had personally violated a county policy. "Black Fir is getting buried. Dispatch says visibility's dropping fast. I need that pass open before the medical transport comes through at 4. Denny Ashcroft managed the county road crews from a warm office with clean boots and laminated emergency plans. He was in his late 50s, gray-haired, neat, and forever wrapped in a jacket that looked too new for the mountains. Denny was not cruel in the loud way. He did not slam doors or bark insults. He simply believed that the world was safest when reduced to forms, signatures, response categories, and liability statements. The trouble was, storms rarely signed forms. Nate looked toward the open bay door. Beyond it, snow flew sideways beneath the yard lights. It did not fall. It attacked. "Pass should have been closed 2 hours ago," Nate said. "It isn't closed." "It should be." A pause. Then Denny said, "Are you refusing the route?" There it was. Not anger, not concern, just the edge of a file folder sliding open. Nate looked down at his hands. Big hands, scarred knuckles, grease near the thumb, hands that had once known weapons, ropes, maps, blood pressure checks, doors kicked in, doors left unopened. Now they knew steering wheels and salt spreaders and the weight of silence. "No," he said. "I'm taking it." "Good. Keep the radio open." Nate climbed into the plow. The engine turned over with a deep metallic groan. For one sharp second, the sound crawled under his ribs and became another engine from another night, one roaring too close, one followed by a flare of light and men yelling over each other. His right hand locked on the wheel. The bay lights blurred. Then the heater coughed, the dashboard rattled, and a packet of wintergreen gum slid off the passenger seat onto the floor. Nate blinked. Wyoming, maintenance yard, snowplow. December. He bent down, picked up the gum, and set it back on the seat. "Idiot," he muttered, though whether he meant the gum, the engine, or himself was not entirely clear. The plow rolled into the storm. Black Fir Pass climbed fast out of town. Houses thinned, then vanished. The road narrowed between walls of pine, their branches heavy and white. Snow hammered the windshield so fiercely that the yellow lights ahead looked like tired eyes trying to see through milk. The blade shoved powder aside in rolling waves, and the truck shuddered each time it struck a hidden ridge of packed ice. Nate drove slowly, steadily, with the patience of a man who had learned that panic was just another way of giving the mountain what it wanted. The radio hissed now and then. Denny checked in twice. Each time Nate answered with as few words as possible. At mile marker 17, the wind changed. It came down the ravine in a long, rising shriek, pressing hard against the plow's side. The sound slipped through the cab seals and filled the space around Nate's head. For a moment, the road ahead thinned and bent into something else. Snow became smoke. The plow lights became flare light. The dark pines became broken walls. Nate's breath caught. His left thumb moved to the face of his old military watch. The glass was scratched, the strap faded, but the second hand still moved with stubborn precision. Tick, tick, tick. He counted 5 movements, then 10. The road returned. He exhaled, jaw tight. "Still here," he said under his breath. The words were not brave. They were a rope tied to a post. About a mile beyond the old lookout, something flashed low on the right side of the road. At first, Nate thought it was ice catching the plow lights. Then he saw it again, a dull metallic glint below the shoulder, half buried beneath drifting snow. He eased off the throttle. The plow rumbled forward another few feet, then stopped. For several seconds he sat without moving, staring into the storm. The road curved there, tight against the mountain. On the outside edge, the guardrail had been bent outward, not broken entirely, but twisted enough to show where something heavy had struck it and gone over at an angle. Nate lifted the radio. "Dispatch, this is Bryce. I've got possible vehicle off-road, Black Fir, just past mile 18. Static answered first. Then Denny's voice came in. "Say again?" "Vehicle off-road. Guardrail damaged. I'm checking. Do not leave the vehicle if conditions are unsafe." Nate looked through the windshield at the ravine. Snow moved like living cloth over the edge. "Noted," he said. He took a flashlight, clipped a headlamp over his wool cap, and stepped out. The wind struck him immediately, hard enough to shove one shoulder back. Snow slapped against his face and stung the exposed skin above his collar. He moved toward the guardrail, boots punching into powder, one gloved hand trailing along the metal for balance. Below, the slope dropped steeply for perhaps 20 yards before breaking against a shelf of rock and black fir trunks. There, half-cocked against the snow, lay a pickup truck on its side. Its front end was buried. One wheel turned slowly in the wind, not spinning, only shifting a little, like a tired animal breathing in its sleep. No horn, no voice, no movement inside that Nate could see. He was about to call it in when something darker than shadow moved beside the truck. Nate lowered the beam. At first the shape seemed part of the wreckage, a mound of black and tan fur crusted with snow. Then a head lifted, a German shepherd, large, male. Black saddle across his back, gold along the chest and legs, face masked dark except for pale snow gathering on the whiskers. One ear stood sharp and high, the other had a small notch along the edge. His body was pressed close to the pickup, but his eyes were fixed uphill on Nate. Not wild eyes, not empty ones. Working eyes. The kind that watched, judged, remembered. Nate moved down carefully, angling his boots into the slope. "Easy," he called, his voice low against the wind. "Easy, boy." The dog tried to stand. His front legs pushed hard, but his rear right leg trembled and nearly folded beneath him. He did not yelp. He simply corrected himself, planted his weight unevenly, and stepped between Nate and the truck. Even injured, he made a wall of his body. Nate stopped. "All right," he said. "That's fair." The dog's breath smoked in the air. Snow clung along his neck and shoulders. Around his throat was an old working collar, black leather, thick and cracked with age. A metal plate hung from it, scraped almost clean. Nate raised the flashlight slowly, giving the dog time to see every movement. The beam caught 3 worn letters. Tal. After that, scratches. A name chewed by weather, metal, and time. Nate's chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "What happened to you?" he whispered. The dog turned his head toward the truck, then toward a cluster of dark pines farther down the slope. He took one limping step in that direction and scraped at the snow with his front paw. Not random, not panic, a signal. Nate looked at the pickup again. "Driver," he called. The storm swallowed the word. He moved closer to the cab, but the dog shifted instantly, placing himself between Nate and the door. Not attacking, blocking, warning, protecting something or someone, even when his own leg could barely hold him. Nate lifted both hands slightly. "I'm not here to take anything from you." The dog stared at him. A ridiculous thought crossed Nate's mind then, sharp and strangely human. This dog had the look of a chief petty officer who had found a civilian touching equipment without permission. Despite the cold, despite the wreck, despite the old fear clawing around the edges of his mind, Nate almost smiled. Almost. He crouched slowly, snow creaking beneath his knees. "I need to check the truck." The dog did not move. Nate looked again at the broken nameplate. "Talon?" he said softly. The dog's ears changed first. The good one lifted higher, the notched one angled forward. His head rose and something passed through his eyes. Not obedience exactly, not relief, but recognition so sudden it seemed to cut through the storm. Nate went still. The wind roared above them. Snow slid in pale ribbons across the overturned truck. Somewhere far above, his plow lights glowed through the whiteout like two small suns failing to rise. He had spoken a name that did not belong to him, yet the dog had answered. For a moment, Black Fir Pass felt less like a road and more like the edge of an old myth, the kind where a wounded guardian waits beside a broken chariot, refusing to leave until the right stranger arrives. Nate swallowed. "All right, Talon," he said. "Let's find out who you're guarding." The dog held his gaze one heartbeat longer. Then, with his injured leg trembling beneath him, Talon turned back toward the buried darkness near the pines and scraped the snow again. Nate did not carry Talon up the slope like a rescued pet. He brought him up the way a man moves something sacred out of a collapsing church, slowly, carefully, with both fear and reverence in his hands. The storm had thickened around Black Fir Pass until the world seemed made of only three things: snow, engine light, and breath. Nate's plow waited above them, its amber lamps turning the blowing white into sheets of dull gold. Below, the overturned pickup lay half-buried against the shelf of rock, silent and stubborn, as if the mountain had placed one hand on it and refused to let go. Talon stood beside Nate on 3 good points of balance and 1 trembling promise. The German shepherd's rear right leg would not hold steady. It quivered whenever he shifted weight, and the muscles along his back tightened in hard waves beneath the ice-crusted fur. Snow had frozen along his belly and chest. His black saddle was dusted gray-white, and his golden legs were packed with clumps of powder. Yet his eyes never drifted far from the pines below. Nate unfolded the emergency blanket from his plow kit. It cracked and flashed silver in the wind. "Not fancy," he muttered, "but neither are we." Talon watched him as if judging the quality of county equipment. Nate wrapped the blanket around the dog's body, careful near the injured leg. Talon stiffened at first, then allowed it. That permission felt heavier than trust. Trust was a warm thing. This was colder and more practical. A working animal deciding for now that the large man in front of him was not the worst option available. Nate clipped a tow strap to the plow's rear anchor and used it as a guideline up the slope. It was ugly work. The snow gave way under his boots. The wind shoved sideways. Twice Talon tried to turn back toward the pickup. Twice Nate braced him with one arm across his chest and said, "Not yet." Each time Talon answered by lifting one front paw and scraping at the snow. Not toward the truck. Toward the lower pocket of dark pines. The motion was weak but precise. A scrape, a pause, another scrape. Nate looked down the slope, then back at the dog. "You know something," he said. Talon's ears tilted forward. That was all. No bark, no cinematic howl into the storm. Just that fixed stare and a body willing to hurt itself for a direction. By the time Nate got him up to the road, his own breath burned in his chest. He opened the passenger side door of the plow and cleared the seat, tossing the gum, a pair of spare gloves, and a county road map into the footwell. Talon resisted being lifted, not aggressively, pridefully, like an old soldier refusing a chair at a memorial service. "Don't make this about dignity," Nate said. "You're wrapped in a shiny blanket." The dog gave him a look so dry that, under different circumstances, Nate might have laughed. He lifted Talon anyway. The dog was heavier than he looked, solid under the ribs, deep-chested, built for steep ground and long work. Nate felt the tremor in the injured leg and the stubborn tension in the shoulders. When he set Talon inside the cab, the shepherd immediately twisted to face the ravine through the windshield. Nate shut the door and keyed the radio. "Dispatch, this is Bryce. I have a live dog at the crash site, large German shepherd, possible working collar, injured rear leg, no driver located." Static rose, fell, then Denny Ashcroft's voice returned. "A dog?" Nate stared down the slope. "That's what I said." "Is the vehicle occupied?" "Unable to confirm. Cab's partially buried. Dog keeps indicating downslope." A long pause followed. Nate could almost see Denny in the county office. Clean jacket, clean desk, clean hands folded over a checklist that had no box for wounded dog pointing at Ravine. "Bryce, secure the animal if safe and return to the maintenance yard. We'll contact animal control." Nate's jaw tightened. "I need a rescue tech out here." "You need to return to the yard." "The dog may be indicating a missing driver." "Maybe," Denny said. "That's not confirmation." Nate looked toward Talon. The dog's nose was inches from the windshield. His breath fogged the glass in quick bursts. Through the fog, his eyes stayed locked on the black trees below. "No," Nate said quietly. "But it's not nothing." He ended the transmission before Denny could turn the sentence into a policy debate. The first person he called was Maribel Vance. He did not have her number because they were friends. Nate did not collect friends. He collected emergency contacts, route maps, spare batteries, and reasons to leave gatherings early. Maribel's number was taped inside the plow's glove box under Mountain Rescue Liaison, written in black marker by some cheerful county clerk who had decorated the label with a tiny drawn snowflake. Maribel answered on the fourth ring. "Vance?" "It's Nate Bryce, Black Fir, vehicle off-road, missing driver." "I've got an injured German shepherd with a working collar. He's indicating downslope." There was no gasp, no dramatic question, just the sound of someone sitting up. "How bad is the dog?" "Rear leg compromised, cold exposure, alert." "Any aggression?" "No, guarding, focused." "Location?" "Mile 18, outside curve." "I'm 25 minutes out if the road holds." "It won't." "Then I'm 35 minutes out." The line clicked dead. Nate looked at the phone for a second. "Efficient," he said. Talon did not appear impressed. Nate drove the plow just far enough to position it as a windbreak near the damaged guardrail, then kept the heater running. He gave Talon water from a bottle poured into a collapsible bowl. The dog sniffed it, drank twice, then turned his head back to the ravine. Nate checked the collar again under the dome light. The plate was worse than he had thought, scratched almost smooth. Tal remained visible, but beyond it the metal had been chewed by weather or deliberate abrasion. He touched the edge with his thumb and felt a strange anger rise in him. A name was not much, but taking even part of it from a creature seemed like a small, cold kind of theft. Talon suddenly leaned forward and pressed his nose against the windshield. A low sound came from his chest, not quite a whine. Nate followed the dog's gaze. For one moment, through a break in the blowing snow, the pines below became clear. There was a depression beyond them, not a path exactly, more like a dark seam where the land folded inward. Then the storm closed over it again. Talon lifted his front paw and struck the dashboard once. Nate froze. The sound was soft, almost polite, but it changed something in the cab. It was not panic. It was insistence. Nate had heard men beg without words before. He had seen hands point from stretchers, eyes search burning doorways, fingers tap maps when voices failed. Talon's paw against the dashboard carried that same terrible clarity. Not there. There. Nate did not move for several seconds. Then he whispered, "All right, I hear you." When Maribel arrived, she came out of the storm like someone the mountain had reluctantly agreed to return. Her rescue truck pulled in behind the plow, red lights muted by snow. She climbed down, wearing a burnt-orange rescue jacket with reflective strips, black snow pants, and a gray cap pulled low over dark hair threaded with silver. A coil of cobalt-blue rope hung at her hip. She moved without wasted motion, the way practical people do when cold is counting every second. She took in the bent guardrail, the plow, the slope, and Nate before looking into the cab. "That him?" "That's him." Maribel opened the passenger door slowly. Talon turned his head. He did not bare his teeth. He simply watched. Maribel did not reach for him. "Hey, big man," she said, her voice low and dry. "You look like trouble with paperwork attached." Talon blinked once. Nate said, "He has a chip. I haven't scanned him." "I brought the reader." She set a small kit on the floorboard and worked with the calm patience of someone who had handled frightened animals, stubborn men, and weather forecasts equally unreliable. She let Talon smell her glove first. Then she ran the scanner along his neck and shoulders. The device beeped once, then flickered, then beeped again, weaker. Maribel frowned. "There's something there," Nate said. "There is," she answered, "but it's not reading clean." "Cold damage?" "Could be, but not usually like this." She adjusted the scanner and tried again. The device caught a partial signal, dropped it, caught it again, then went blank. Maribel's mouth tightened. Nate recognized that expression. It was the face of a person who had just watched a simple explanation walk away. She checked Talon's ears next, gently parting the thick fur near the left. Talon allowed it, though his body stayed rigid. Near the inner edge, almost hidden, was a tiny marking, faded, dark, and too deliberate to be a random scar. Maribel leaned closer. "Well," she said. Nate waited. She looked at him. "That's an old field code." "For what?" "Search dogs, civilian mountain units mostly. Wyoming, Montana, sometimes Idaho, depending on the contract year." Talon shifted, trying again to look past them toward the ravine. Nate felt the storm press against the cab. "You know which unit?" "Not from that alone. But you've seen it." "Yes." The word fell between them, small and heavy. Before Nate could ask more, headlights swept across the snow behind them. A county SUV pulled up hard behind Maribel's truck. Denny Ashcroft got out wearing a clean gray-blue county coat, black gloves, and boots that looked as if they had been purchased by someone who expected winter but preferred not to meet it personally. He held a waterproof folder under one arm even here, in a storm, because some men carried weapons, some carried rosaries, and Denny carried forms. He did not look down the ravine first. He looked at the dog. "What is that animal doing in county equipment?" Nate stepped away from the plow door. "Staying warm." Denny's eyes narrowed. "This is not a shelter." "No." "And you are not authorized to transport stray animals." "He's not a stray." "You don't know that." Maribel closed her kit. "He has a chip and an old search dog field code." Denny turned to her. "Can you identify ownership?" "Not yet." "Then we treat it as unknown." Nate said, "The driver is unknown too. We treating him as paperwork?" Denny's face tightened, but his voice stayed level. "Bryce, you will not make this personal." That sentence landed too close to old rooms and old accusations. Nate felt it strike the same place where Elise's silence had once settled. He kept his hands still. Denny continued, "Animal control will take the dog for quarantine and identification. If it belongs to a private organization, they will be contacted. If it is injured, they will arrange veterinary care." Maribel's eyes sharpened. Animal control is 40 minutes out in this weather if they come at all. This dog needs a proper exam." "And the county maintenance yard is not a veterinary clinic," Denny replied, "nor is it a rescue kennel. If that dog bites an employee, if it contaminates a crash site, if someone claims we mishandled property belonging to a rescue unit or contractor—" "Property," Nate repeated. Denny looked at him. "Legally, possibly, yes." Talon raised his head. The cab light caught the dog's eyes, dark and bright at once. He looked from Nate to Denny, then toward the ravine again, as if human words were an inefficient storm of their own. Nate said, "He keeps pointing downslope." "He is injured and stressed. He's trained." "He may have been trained," Denny said. "That does not authorize us to send people into a whiteout because of a dog's behavior." Maribel lifted a hand slightly. "He's not wrong about the whiteout." Nate turned to her. She met his look without apology. "And you're not wrong about the dog." That was Maribel's gift and curse, Nate thought. She did not hand comfort to anyone who had not earned it. She went on, "Talon can't work this slope on that leg. If we use him, we risk making the injury worse. If we ignore him, we might miss a live indication. So we don't do either stupid thing." Denny's mouth compressed. "There is no authorized search team assembled." "Then assemble one," Nate said. "In this weather?" "Yes." Denny stepped closer. "No. We secure the scene, mark the location, notify sheriff's office, and wait for conditions to improve." "Someone may not have conditions to improve." The words came out colder than Nate intended. Denny stared at him. The wind shoved snow between them in white lashes. For a moment, the only sound was the plow engine idling like a tired beast. Then Denny said, "You are too close to this." Nate gave a short laugh with no humor in it. "I found it 20 minutes ago." "I'm not talking about the crash." Maribel looked between them but said nothing. Denny lowered his voice. Somehow that made it sharper. "You lost your family because you didn't know when to stop, Bryce. Don't lose your job over a dog." The sentence did not explode. It slid in clean. Nate felt the old instinct rise, the desire to step forward, to make the air change, to remind Denny that some lines should not be crossed by men with warm offices and dry socks. Instead, he looked at Talon. The shepherd had turned fully toward Denny now. He was still wrapped in the silver emergency blanket. His injured leg trembled. Snow melted in small drops from his muzzle onto the floorboard. He did not growl. He did not bark. He simply stared. There was such grave disapproval in that look that even Denny paused. For one absurd second, Nate had the impression that Talon was not looking at a county manager, but at a recruit who had just saluted with the wrong hand before a very ancient and very unimpressed god. Maribel broke the silence. "I'm taking the dog to my rescue bay first," she said. "He needs warmth, a better leg check, and a contained space. I'll document everything. You can send animal control there if you want, but moving him twice in this storm is bad practice." Denny looked ready to refuse. Maribel added, "And if this becomes a liability review, you'll want it noted that the injured working dog was stabilized by the closest qualified rescue technician instead of left in a plow cab. That did it. Not compassion, not the dog, not even the missing driver." The word liability turned the key. Denny pointed at Nate. "You do not return to that slope without authorization." Nate said nothing. "I mean it." "You continue on your own. You're suspended pending review." The radio in Denny's SUV crackled faintly. Snow gathered on the folder under his arm. He looked at Maribel, then at Talon, then finally toward the ravine, as if noticing, late, that a mountain did not care who supervised the county road department. "Get the dog contained," he said. "I'll notify sheriff's office." He turned back toward his SUV. Nate remained beside the plow. Talon's eyes followed Denny until the man opened his door. Then the shepherd shifted, slow and painful, and looked once more toward the pines below. His front paw lifted. It touched the edge of the seat. Scraped once. Nate heard it over the wind. Maribel heard it too. Neither of them spoke. The storm kept burying Black Fir Pass, patient as an empire. Nate reached into the cab and rested one gloved hand lightly on Talon's shoulder. "Not yet," he said, though the words hurt more this time. "But I heard you." Talon did not relax. He only kept looking down into the ravine, as if somewhere beneath all that snow a promise was still breathing. Dawn did not break over Black Fir Pass. It seeped in slowly, gray and thin, like water finding its way through a crack in stone. The storm had not stopped. It had only grown tired enough to breathe between its blows. Snow still crossed the road in white ribbons, and the pines below the curve stood half-buried, their dark branches lifting out of the drifts like the fingers of old giants refusing sleep. Nate stood beside Maribel's rescue truck with his collar raised and his hands tucked beneath his arms for warmth. He had not gone home. He had not even tried. Talon lay on a padded rescue board in the back of the truck, wrapped in a blanket that had lost its shine beneath a dusting of snow. His rear leg had been checked and stabilized as well as Maribel could manage without a clinic. She had wrapped it with firm, careful layers, then fitted a support sling beneath his body so he would not put full weight on it. The shepherd did not approve of any of this. That was obvious. He watched Maribel's hands with the grave dissatisfaction of a creature who believed medical caution was an insult to his professional reputation. "You can glare all you want," Maribel told him, tightening the strap. "You're not running this slope on that leg." Talon blinked once. Nate stood near the tailgate, silent. Maribel looked at him without looking up. "That goes for you, too." "I'm not injured." "No, you're just stubborn, sleep-deprived, and emotionally allergic to being told no." Nate frowned. "That a rescue diagnosis?" "Field observation." For a moment the corner of his mouth almost moved, not quite a smile, more like the ghost of one checking if the room was safe. They had waited until the light improved because Maribel refused to let either man or dog stumble blind into the ravine. Denny had not liked the idea of returning to the site at all. He had repeated that sheriff's office should take over when conditions cleared. But Maribel had found a narrow line inside the rules. They were not launching a full search, only documenting the crash site, checking the vehicle for identification, and recording Talon's behavior as a possible working dog indication. Nate suspected Denny had agreed only because Maribel said the word documenting 3 times. Some words were lanterns for men like Denny. Others were cages. Nate moved beside Talon and rested one gloved hand near the dog's shoulder. Not on him at first, near him, giving warning, giving choice. Talon shifted his eyes to Nate, then back toward the ravine. "We do this slow," Nate said, the dog's ears angled forward. "No charging, no proving anything. You point, we listen." Maribel clipped the support sling to a short lead attached to Talon's harness. The harness was old and plain, not the bright official kind used in demonstrations, but it held firm across his chest and ribs. A handle ran along the top so Nate could take weight off the injured leg if needed. Maribel handed Nate the lead. "He doesn't work for you." Nate looked at her. "He works with you," she said. "There's a difference. Learn it before he pays for your pride." The words hit harder than he expected. Nate had spent most of his life respecting dogs, especially working dogs, but respect could still become use if a man was desperate enough. He looked down at Talon, at the tremor in the back leg, at the frost clinging to the thick fur around his neck, at the old collar with those worn letters, "Tail," and felt something in his chest shift. It was the first lesson the dog gave him. Loyalty was not a blank check, not even when the one offering it had 4 legs and eyes like burning coal. They descended slowly, Maribel went first, testing the snow with a probe. Nate followed with Talon, using the sling whenever the slope steepened. The dog wanted to move faster. His body leaned toward the lower trees with unmistakable purpose, but each time he tried to push ahead, Nate stopped and lifted slightly on the harness. "Easy," Nate murmured. "I heard the lady. We're not making you a hero before breakfast." Behind them, Maribel said, "Good. He listens better than most men." "I'm assuming you mean the dog." I said what I said. The humor was small, dry, and quickly taken by the wind, but it helped. In places like Black Fir, a joke did not warm the body. It only reminded the heart that it still knew how to turn toward light. The pickup lay where it had been the night before, half turned against a shelf of rock. Snow had filled some of the broken spaces around it, smoothing the damage into something almost peaceful. That disturbed Nate more than the wreck itself. The mountain had already begun editing the scene, covering hard facts with soft white lies. Maribel moved to the cab while Nate held Talon back. "Driver's side is jammed," she said. "Passenger side might open if I clear the packed snow." Nate wanted to help. Talon wanted to go closer. Neither of them moved. The dog stood rigid, nostrils working. Then he turned sharply away from the truck, not toward the road, toward the cluster of firs below. Nate felt the lead tighten. "Talon," he warned. The shepherd stopped, but his whole body aimed downhill. He lowered his nose to the snow near a twisted root, inhaled, then lifted his head and looked farther down the ravine. Maribel noticed. "Mark it," she said. Nate pulled a strip of orange tape from his pocket and tied it to a low branch. The color looked almost loud against the snow, a little flag of human concern in a kingdom that did not care. Maribel returned to the cab and worked the door open enough to reach inside. She was careful, methodical, photographing before touching, calling out what she found. Nate listened while keeping Talon steady. "Registration papers," she said. "Name is Caleb Rourke." Nate repeated it silently. Caleb Rourke. A name changed a shape in the mind. Before that, the missing driver had been a role, a possible body, an emergency category. Now he was a man with a wallet, a truck, somewhere he had been going, and perhaps someone waiting for a call that had not come. "Age 41, Maribel said. "Local address outside High Ridge. There's an old organization card in here, too." "What organization?" She leaned farther in, then came back holding a plastic card in a gloved hand. Snow landed on it and melted around the edges. "Summit Mercy Search and Recovery." Nate looked at Talon. The dog did not react to the name. Or perhaps he did, but the reaction was too old to show. "Mountain rescue outfit?" Nate asked. "Used to be." Maribel's voice lost a little warmth. "They had a civilian search dog unit, took federal and state grants, did winter response, missing hiker calls, avalanche support. Good reputation for a while." "For a while." She slipped the card into an evidence bag. "Public record says they shut the dog unit down last year. Budget cuts." Talon suddenly stepped forward, not far but enough that Nate had to lift the sling. "Easy." The shepherd's nose dropped near the base of another fir. He breathed in, paused, then moved his head slowly along the snow as though reading a line written beneath the surface. At the edge of the trees, he stopped, his front paw lifted, not scraping wildly this time, just pointing. Maribel crouched beside the spot. With 2 fingers, she lifted a small piece of fabric caught beneath a low branch. Dark blue, torn from something like a jacket lining or pack strap. It snapped lightly in the wind. No dramatic stain, no horror, only cloth where cloth should not have been. That made it worse in its own quiet way. Someone had passed there, or fallen there, or been carried by the slope while the storm erased the rest. Nate looked down past the trees. The ravine folded into a narrow seam, almost invisible under new snow. A body could slide there, a man could crawl there, a man could be close enough for a dog to know and far enough for human ears to hear nothing. Maribel put the fabric in a bag and marked the tree. Then the slope groaned. It was not loud at first, just a low shifting sound beneath the snowpack. Maribel's hand shot up. Back! Nate lifted the sling and pulled Talon toward the rock shelf. The dog resisted for half a second, then stumbled with them as a small section of slope below the firs gave way. Snow slid across the narrow line they had been studying, pouring into the seam and filling it with a soft, heavy rush. It was over in seconds. No thunder, no grand collapse. Just enough movement to close a door. Talon lunged once against the harness, a harsh breath tearing from his chest. Nate held him firm. "No," he said, though everything in the dog's body argued back. Maribel stared at the fresh slide. "That blocks the direct approach. Can we go around?" "Not with him, not right now." Talon twisted to look at Nate. Snow clung to his muzzle. His eyes were not begging. That might have been easier. They were accusing him of understanding too slowly. The county radio crackled from Nate's shoulder. Denny's voice came through, thinned by static. "Vance? Bryce? Report?" Maribel took the radio before Nate could answer. "We have vehicle registration. Missing driver identified as Caleb Rourke, 41. Found possible track indication and fabric downslope. Minor slide just blocked direct access. Conditions unstable." "That confirms my concern," Denny said. "Withdraw from the slope. We close the site until proper team assessment." Nate reached for the radio. Maribel moved it slightly away from him without looking. "This may be a live search," she said. "It may also become a second incident," Denny replied. "No one goes deeper until conditions improve and Sheriff's Office authorizes a full response." The words were reasonable. That was the cruelty of them. Nate could not hate the logic. He could only hate the timing. Avoid secondary injury. Preserve the scene. Wait for a specialized team. Denny's phrases marched in clean formation, while somewhere below them, Caleb Rourke's time thinned like breath on glass. Maribel ended the transmission. Nate looked at the blocked seam. "Reasonable can still be wrong," he said. "Yes," Maribel replied, "and reckless can still feel righteous." He turned toward her. She did not soften. "If we take Talon past this point, we may ruin that leg. If we take ourselves past it without a team, we may give Caleb more people to wait for. So we mark, withdraw, and force them to escalate properly." "Force them how?" "By making the evidence too clean to ignore." Nate looked down at the snow that had swallowed half of what they had found. Clean. That word almost made him laugh. Nothing about this mountain was clean. It was only white. Then the red rescue light from Maribel's truck swept through the blowing snow above them. It flashed once across Nate's face. The world slipped. Not all the way. Not like in films where the past arrives complete with music and fire. This was uglier and smaller. The ravine vanished in fragments. The red light became another red light. Snow became dust in the air. Wind became rotor wash. A command came back to him from years ago, not loud, but close to his ear. Move. Leave it. Move. His body obeyed an old order before his mind could refuse it. He froze. His breath broke into short pieces. His fingers tightened around the lead until the strap creaked. Maribel saw it. She did not shout his name. She did not touch him. She simply stepped closer, becoming a shape in his side vision, a marker in the storm. Then Talon leaned. The shepherd pressed the weight of his head and shoulder against Nate's thigh. Not dramatic, not magical, just weight, warmth, fur, a living thing insisting on the present. Nate felt the harness in his hand. He felt the cold in his lungs. He felt the mountain beneath his boots. Tick, tick, tick. His thumb found the face of his old watch. He counted. 5, 10. The ravine returned. Nate exhaled slowly. It hurt, but it was his own breath again. Maribel's voice came quiet beside him. "This dog doesn't only know how to find the missing." Nate looked down. Talon was still leaning against him, injured leg trembling, eyes fixed below. Maribel finished, "He knows how to keep the living from disappearing too." Nate did not answer. There are sentences a man cannot answer because they are too kind, and others because they are too true. This one was both. They withdrew from the slope slowly, marking each point: the route, the fabric, the edge of the slide, the angle from the truck. Maribel photographed everything. Nate carried more of Talon's weight on the climb back, and this time the dog allowed it, without as much resistance. At the truck, Maribel read through the papers from the pickup again. In the glove compartment, sealed in a plastic sleeve, she found a folded appointment note with an address in town and a time circled in black ink. "Harper Vale," she said. Nate looked over. "Who's that?" "Reporter, local paper, then regional freelance. She wrote a big piece on Summit Mercy a few years back." "What was Caleb meeting her for?" Maribel unfolded another page. It was not an official document, more like a printed email draft, words cut off by water damage and cold. But some lines remained readable. Concern regarding false transfer records. Dogs listed active after removal. Talon reclassified unfit. Private facility receipt pending. Nate stared at the page. Talon was theirs, he said. Maribel's jaw tightened. "Looks that way." And Caleb had him? Maybe got him back. Maybe was trying to. Talon lay in the back of the rescue truck now, exhausted but awake. At the sound of Caleb's name, his ears moved. Nate saw it. So did Maribel. The pieces did not form the whole truth yet, but they formed enough of a shape to change the air. Caleb Rourke had not been driving Black Fir Pass as a stranger caught in bad weather. He had been carrying something toward daylight, papers, proof, maybe a story he could no longer hold alone. Beside him had ridden a dog officially erased from usefulness, a dog whose chip stuttered like a silenced witness, a dog who still knew how to search even after humans had written him out of the record. Nate looked toward the ravine. The storm moved over it again, smoothing the slide, covering the orange markers little by little. The mountain was closing its hand. And somewhere beneath that hand, Caleb Rourke had a name, a past, and perhaps a little time left. Nate rested his palm against Talon's shoulder. The shepherd did not look at him this time. He kept watching the white place where the tracks had vanished. The accident no longer felt like an accident. It felt like a door slammed shut by the storm, just as the truth had tried to walk through. Maribel did not take Nate to the sheriff first. She took him to a veterinarian. That, more than anything, told Nate the kind of woman she was. Some people, when frightened by a mystery, ran toward authority. Maribel ran toward the person most likely to notice what pain had been hidden under fur. Dr. Linnea Hartwell's clinic sat at the edge of High Ridge, where the town thinned into pastureland and wind-bent fences. It was a low building with a green metal roof, half-buried shrubs near the entrance, and warm yellow light spilling across the snow before dawn had fully decided what sort of day it wanted to become. A wooden sign near the door read, "Hartwell Animal Care." The letters faded by years of mountain sun and winter salt. Talon refused to be carried inside at first, not with teeth, not with noise. He simply planted his front paws on the rubber mat in the back of Maribel's truck and looked at the clinic door as if it were a suspicious border crossing. "You know," Maribel said, standing beside him with the support sling, "for a patient, you have a lot of opinions." Talon flicked his notched ear. Nate stood on the other side, one hand ready near the harness, but not grabbing. He had learned that much. Talon would accept help, but not if it was handled like capture. "Easy," Nate said. "No one's asking you to surrender your kingdom." The shepherd turned his head toward him. For a moment, those dark eyes held the same grave judgment they had given Denny. Then Talon stepped down, stiff and uneven, allowing the sling to take part of his weight. Inside, the clinic smelled of antiseptic, old wood, wet dog, and coffee left too long on a burner. It was not a grand place. The floor showed scuffs from thousands of claws. A bulletin board near the counter held lost pet notices, vaccine reminders, and one faded photograph of a search dog standing in snow beside 3 exhausted rescuers. Talon saw that photograph before Nate did. He stopped. The leash tightened. Nate followed his gaze. The dog in the old photograph was not Talon, smaller, lighter. A female shepherd mix with bright eyes and snow dusting her muzzle. Someone had written beneath it, in black marker, "Juniper, First Summit, Mercy Search Dog, 2012. Maribel noticed the pause, but said nothing. A door opened behind the counter. Dr. Linnea Hartwell stepped out wearing a white coat over a gray turtleneck, her silver blonde hair pinned back in a way that had begun tidy and surrendered some time before sunrise. She was in her mid-50s, slight and straight-backed, with thin frame glasses low on her nose and eyes the color of storm-washed sage. She did not rush toward Talon. She did not soften her voice into sweetness. She simply looked at him, then at the way his right rear leg held off the floor, then at the collar half hidden in his winter-thick fur. Her expression changed so little that Nate might have missed it. Maribel did not. "You know him," Maribel said. Linnea came around the counter slowly. "Let me see his ear." Talon watched her. His body tightened, but he did not step back. Linnea extended one hand, palm down, letting him decide. Talon sniffed her fingers. Something in his posture shifted then, not relaxation exactly, but recognition without comfort, like a man remembering the name of a town where he had once been lonely. Linnea parted the fur near his left ear. The tiny dark field code showed beneath the skin. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she took off her glasses, cleaned them on the edge of her coat, and put them back on, though they had not been dirty. "Hello, Talon," she said. Nate looked at Maribel. Maribel's jaw set. Talon's ears rose at the name in Linnea's voice. He did not wag his tail. He did something quieter. He lowered his head a fraction, as if accepting that someone had finally stopped pretending he was unknown. Linnea turned toward the exam room. "Bring him in." The exam table was padded and low enough that Talon did not have to be lifted far. Even so, Nate and Maribel worked together, taking most of the dog's weight through the sling. Talon endured this with the gloomy majesty of an old king being helped into a bath he had not approved. Linnea examined the leg first. Her hands were careful, efficient, and almost stern in their gentleness. She checked swelling, range of motion, paw response, muscle tension. Talon flinched once, a quick tightening around the eyes, but made no sound. "Soft tissue strain at minimum," Linnea said. "Possible ligament involvement. No obvious fracture by palpation, but I want imaging before anyone gets poetic about him climbing ravines." Maribel glanced at Nate. Nate lifted both hands slightly. "I heard it." "Good," Linnea said. "Because dogs like this will work until their bodies file a formal complaint by collapsing." She moved to the scanner next. The chip responded the same way it had for Maribel, one weak signal, then nothing clean enough to identify. Linnea's face grew colder. "That isn't ordinary failure," she said. "You're sure?" Nate asked. "No, I'm careful." She tried again, adjusted the angle, waited for the faint beep, then watched the reader lose it. "But I have seen damaged chips. I have seen migrated chips. I have seen cheap chips. This looks like interference or deliberate tampering." The word deliberate settled in the room with the smell of snowmelt and antiseptic. Nate looked at Talon's old collar. Tal. 3 letters left standing like fence posts after a fire. Linnea unfastened the collar and laid it on a towel. Beneath the leather, the fur was flattened and rubbed thin in places. She touched the metal plate, then went very still. "Maribel," she said, "lock the front door." Maribel did not ask why. She went out, turned the deadbolt, and flipped the sign to closed. Nate watched Linnea walk to a file cabinet in the corner of the room. It was old, beige, dented, the kind of cabinet that seemed too ordinary to hold anything more dangerous than rabies certificates and unpaid invoices. Linnea opened the bottom drawer, moved 3 folders, and pulled out a box labeled Summit Mercy. K9 medical copies. "You kept records," Nate said. "I keep everything." "Because you expected this?" "No," Linnea said, "because people who don't keep records are forced to trust people who do." There was no thunder in the sentence. Still, Nate felt it land. Linnea flipped through the folders with quick, practiced fingers. Each tab had a name: Juniper, Mesa, Bishop, Talon, Lark, Echo. Others Nate did not have time to read before she stopped. She opened Talon's file. Inside were exam notes, vaccination records, weight charts, joint assessments, training fitness reports. Linnea ran one finger down the page. "Last full exam," she said, 14 months ago. Good cardiac response, strong scent focus, minor fatigue markers consistent with overtraining, no degenerative issue, no behavioral retirement recommendation. Maribel folded her arms. "Official file says he washed out?" Linnea looked up sharply. "What exact wording?" "Unfit for continued operational support." A humorless breath left Linnea's nose. That is not a medical conclusion. That is a sentence written by someone who wanted a useful dog removed from a useful list. Talon lay with his head on the table pad, eyes moving between the 3 humans. At Caleb's name, when Linnea began describing his handler, the dog lifted his head. Caleb Rourke was his primary volunteer handler, Linnea said. Not legal owner at the time. Summit Mercy owned the dogs through the program, but Caleb and Talon were paired for winter terrain. They were good, more than good. "How good?" Nate asked. Linnea looked at Talon, and for the first time her voice softened. He could locate human scent beneath compacted snow where 2 other dogs gave uncertain signals. He knew how to read wind-off rock walls. He had a strange gift for finding protected pockets, hollows, shallow caves, tree wells. Places where someone might still have air. The room became very quiet. Nate thought of the seam below the pines, the little hollow the storm had swallowed. Linnea continued, "He also stayed calm in chaos. Sirens, shouting, lights, weather. Some dogs get louder under pressure. Talon got clearer." Maribel said, "Caleb was headed to meet Harper Vale." Linnea's mouth tightened at the name, but not with dislike, more like recognition of a door she had hoped would stay shut until morning. "She wrote the article," Linnea said. "What article?" Nate asked. "The one that made Summit Mercy beloved?" Linnea carried the file to a desk in the corner and woke an old computer. The screen took its time glowing to life. While she waited, she opened 3 more folders and laid them beside Talon's. Bishop, Lark, Echo. Each had a medical record, each had a final note from Linnea that looked routine. Then, clipped behind them, were printed letters from Summit Mercy. Transferred to long-term care partner. Reassigned for non-operational support. Placed through contracted training affiliate. Different phrases. Same vanishing act. Nate read them once, then again. "Where did they go?" he asked. Linnea gave him the answer with her silence before she spoke it. "Some to private facilities, at least one to a security training contractor. One I traced to a ranch family who thought they were adopting a retired dog legitimately. 2 I never found." Maribel's cobalt rope hung at her hip, bright against the dark of her jacket. She touched it once, not nervously, but as if checking that a promise still remained tied to her. "And the funding?" she asked. Linnea clicked through files on the computer. The public reports kept listing a maintenance allocation for canine readiness after the unit supposedly downsized. Food, medical, transport, refresher training. The language shifted. The dogs stayed alive in the budget long after some disappeared in real life. Nate stared at the folders. Dogs who died on paper. Not truly dead. Worse in some ways. Converted into words no one had to feed, numbers no one had to walk, assets no one had to look in the eye. The front of the clinic shuddered under a gust of wind. For a second, Nate saw the whole thing not as a conspiracy, but as a winter field. White, clean, official, covering whatever had been left underneath. "Who ran it?" he asked. Linnea opened a website archived on her desktop. A photograph filled the screen. A man in his 50s stood before a banner showing a silver mountain peak and the words, "Summit, Mercy Search, and Recovery." He had neatly combed salt and pepper hair, a dark parka too clean for field work, and a smile polished enough to reflect donors. "Graham Sutter," Linnea said. "Executive Director. He speaks beautifully about mission, sustainability, community resilience. He can make abandonment sound like strategic care." Nate studied the man's face. He had known men like that. Men who never raised their voices because they had learned other ways to make a room obey. Men who could shake your hand warmly while moving your name from one column to another. "Caleb challenged him?" Nate asked. "Repeatedly," Linnea said. "At first about training schedules, then medical care, then the transfers. Caleb believed a dog that served in rescue deserved more than a disappearing act." Talon's head lowered again, but his eyes stayed open. Nate wondered how many times Caleb had said that in rooms where people smiled and wrote nothing down. Maribel took out her phone. "I'm calling Harper." Linnea did not stop her. Harper Vale answered after 2 attempts. Maribel put the call on speaker. "What is it?" a woman's voice asked. Alert, rough with little sleep, guarded from the first syllable. "Harper, it's Maribel Vance. I'm with Nate Bryce and Dr. Hartwell. We found Caleb Rourke's truck on Black Fir." Silence. Then, quieter, "Is he alive?" "We don't know," Maribel said. "We found signs he may have gone downslope. We also found your name in his truck." Another silence. This one colder. "What exactly did you find?" Nate stepped closer. He wanted to take the phone, wanted to say the shortest path through the truth, as if words were a locked door and force might open them. But Harper was not a door. She was a person. And people, Nate had learned too late, did not open just because you pushed. Maribel looked at him. She did not hand him the phone. She waited. So Nate spoke from where he stood. Caleb had papers about Summit Mercy, false transfer records, dogs listed after removal. Talon was with him. "Talon?" Harper asked. "The German Shepherd, search dog, injured, alive." Harper inhaled sharply. Caleb said if he didn't make the meeting... The words stopped. Nate's hand tightened around the edge of the exam table. Linnea said, "What did he say?" Harper's voice lowered. "He texted me before he left. If I don't get there, find the dogs who died on paper." I thought he was being dramatic. No one in the exam room moved. Talon lifted his head at the sound of Caleb's name again, ears forward, body tense under the blanket. Harper continued, more carefully now. "Listen to me. I wrote the Summit Mercy profile 4 years ago. I helped make them look like saints in snow boots. If Caleb is right, I need documentation before I publish a word. Names, dates, records, chain of custody. I'm not building a story on grief and a wounded dog." Nate felt anger flash through him. Not because she was wrong, because she was right at the worst possible time. "Someone is missing in that ravine," he said. "I understand that." "No," Nate said. "You understand a story." Maribel's eyes cut toward him. Harper went quiet. Nate heard himself breathing. Too hard, too close to the edge of something. Then Linnea, small and straight-backed beside the desk, said, "Miss Vale, you will have documentation, medical records, transfer letters, field code confirmation. I will sign what I can verify. I will not sign what I cannot." That steadied the room. Harper's voice changed, less defensive, more human. "Send me copies, securely, and keep the dog protected. If Summit Mercy hears Talon surfaced, they may claim him as program property." The word property entered the room like cold air under a door. Nate looked at Talon. The shepherd's injured leg was wrapped. His old collar lay on the towel. His name had been scratched down to 3 letters by weather, or hands, or both. Property. Nate had never liked the word when applied to a living creature. He liked it even less now. After the call ended, Linnea began making copies. She scanned Talon's records, photographed the ear code, documented the damaged chip response, and wrote a temporary medical hold in clean, precise language. Nate watched her write. Her hand was narrow, almost delicate. The pen moved steadily across the page. Patient. Talon. Male German Shepherd. Working dog field code identified. Injury requires restricted movement and supervised care. Transfer not recommended pending medical evaluation and ownership verification. It was only paper. Thin, white, ordinary paper. But when Linnea signed her name at the bottom, Nate felt something he had not expected. Relief. Not the big kind. Not salvation. Just a small brace beneath the weight. For years, he had believed protection meant standing between danger and what mattered with his body alone. Armor, muscle, silence, endurance. But here was Linnea Hartwell, 5'something, silver hair coming loose from its clip, holding off an entire cold machine with a paragraph and a signature. Sometimes a shield was not made of steel. Sometimes it was a medical hold. Sometimes it was a woman with tired eyes refusing to let a wounded dog be turned back into a line item. Maribel taped a copy of the hold to Talon's carrier. "He stays here?" Nate asked. "For now," Linnea said. "Warm, monitored, and legally inconvenient." Maribel almost smiled. "That last part may save him." Talon shifted on the pad. His head was heavy now, exhaustion finally dragging at him. Nate stepped closer and rested his hand near the dog's shoulder again. This time, Talon moved first. He pressed his muzzle into Nate's glove. Just once, brief, quiet. Not affection exactly. Not yet, but permission. Nate looked down at him, then at the folders spread across Linnea's desk, the names, the transfer letters, the careful lies dressed as care. Outside, snow kept falling over High Ridge, over Black Fir, over the ravine where Caleb Rourke had vanished with the truth half delivered. Inside the clinic, beneath yellow lights and the smell of coffee gone bitter, the dogs who had died on paper began to breathe again. Caleb Rourke's storage unit sat at the far edge of High Ridge, where the town stopped pretending to be warm. It was one of 12 metal units behind a chain-link fence, half buried in drifted snow, with a security light buzzing overhead like an insect too foolish to die in winter. Beyond it, empty pasture rolled toward the foothills, white and silent, broken only by fence posts and the dark backs of distant cattle huddled against the wind. Harper Vale met Nate there just after noon. She arrived in a blue-green winter coat, a rust-colored scarf wrapped tight at her throat, and boots already crusted white from walking through the lot. Her hair, brown with copper in it, had been pulled back carelessly, though the storm had freed half of it by the time she reached the gate. She carried a black shoulder bag, a notebook, and a small recorder she did not take out yet. Nate noticed that. Reporters, he thought, must have their own version of holsters. "You have permission to be here?" he asked. Harper held up a key sealed in a plastic evidence sleeve. "Caleb left a spare with a neighbor. The neighbor called me after Maribel reached out. He said Caleb told him if anything happened, I could open the unit." "That sounds convenient." It sounds like a man who was scared and trying not to be. Nate said nothing. Harper looked at him for a moment, not unkindly. You don't trust easily? No? At least you're efficient about it. That almost earned a response. Almost. The lock was stiff from cold. Nate had to cup it in one gloved hand and breathe against the metal before the key would turn. When the door rolled upward, it screamed along the track, a long, rusty complaint that made the pasture seem even quieter after it stopped. Inside, there was no hidden command center, no dramatic wall of red string, no secret bunker of truth. Just cardboard boxes, plastic bins, old rescue gear, a folded dog crate, 3 cracked helmets, and framed photographs leaning face in against a metal shelf. The air smelled of dust, rubber, cold paper, and the faint musk of dogs that had once ridden in vehicles after long days in snow. Harper stepped in first and stopped. On the nearest shelf was a photograph of Caleb kneeling beside Talon in a training field. The shepherd looked younger there, coat glossy, ears sharp, eyes fixed on Caleb's hand. Caleb was laughing, one hand buried in the thick fur at Talon's neck. Behind them stood several volunteers in orange rescue jackets and a banner with Summit Mercy's Silver Mountain logo. Nate picked up the photograph. There was no mystery in it. That was what struck him. No coded message. No clue. Just a man and a dog before everything went wrong. Harper looked over his shoulder. That was from my article. Nate glanced at her. She swallowed. The one that helped make Summit Mercy famous. Her voice did not ask for forgiveness. It only admitted weight. They worked in silence after that. Harper photographed every box before opening it. Nate wanted to move faster, but her process held him back. At first that irritated him. Then, slowly, he began to understand. This was her version of rope and harness, a way to keep truth from falling apart under pressure. They found training logs with Talon's name written in Caleb's blocky handwriting, weather reports from search drills, receipts for veterinary visits, printed emails with portions highlighted, draft complaints that Caleb had never sent or had sent and never received answers for. One folder was labeled Transfers. Do not trust, Summit copy. Inside were photocopied receipts and transport forms. The language was careful, slippery, long-term care partner, reassignment facility, non-operational support placement. Nate had seen softer words used for harder things. Military reports had their own disguises: collateral, withdrawal, strategic necessity. Words that stood very straight while people bent beneath them. Harper crouched beside a box of old harnesses. He knew no one would believe him without proof. Would you have? She did not answer quickly. No, she said at last. Not at first. Nate looked at her. Harper ran her thumb along the edge of a photograph. I spent 2 weeks with Summit Mercy 4 years ago. Graham Sutter gave perfect quotes. The dogs looked cared for. Volunteers adored Caleb. Donors cried at demonstrations. I wrote the story people wanted to read. And now? Now I'm wondering how much truth can hide in a room where everyone is clapping. That stayed with Nate more than he expected. Near the back of the unit, behind a rolled rescue map of high-ridge terrain, Nate found something taped to the metal wall. A small black USB drive. No label, no decoration. Just a piece of plastic small enough to lose in a glove, and large enough, maybe, to pull dead names back into daylight. Harper took one step forward, then stopped herself. Photograph it first, she said. Nate held still while she documented the map, the tape, the drive, the surrounding shelf. Only then did he peel it free and place it in a small evidence bag she handed him. What's on it? He asked. If Caleb was careful, transport schedules, funding reports, collar photos, chip records, maybe backups of emails. Can you read it? Yes, but not here. Nate put the bag inside his jacket. Harper saw the motion. Her eyes sharpened. "I should hold that." "You said not here." "I said I can't read it here. That doesn't mean you take it and disappear into the mountains." "I'm not disappearing." "You live like disappearing has a forwarding address." Nate's face hardened. Harper did not step back. "Caleb trusted me with this story. And Talon trusted me at the ravine. Talon is a dog. Caleb made a plan. That dog found more truth in the snow than half the people in this town found in 4 years." Harper's jaw tightened, but she did not fire back. Perhaps because he was right. Perhaps because right did not make him safe. Nate forced himself to lower his voice. "I'll make a copy at the maintenance yard. Then I'll bring it to you." That is exactly the kind of sentence men say when they confuse control with responsibility. He looked away. The words struck too close to the old architecture of his life. Every door locked from inside, every burden carried alone, until it became a weapon against the people waiting outside. But he still kept the USB. The road back to town felt longer than usual. The second storm was coming over the peaks, its front edge already dragging gray curtains across the sky. Nate could see it in the way the light changed, how the snowfields lost their shadows, how the wind grew organized. Mountains announced danger the way old kings announced judgment, not by shouting, but by making every creature quiet. He meant to go directly to the maintenance yard. Instead, he turned toward Linnea's clinic. He told himself it would only take a minute to check on Talon. That was the lie, and like most lies men tell themselves, it sounded almost responsible. Inside the clinic, Talon lay on a thick pad near the exam room heater, his injured leg wrapped and elevated. Linnea had given him a mild sedative and pain medication, but the shepherd's eyes opened as soon as Nate stepped in. The tail did not wag. Talon was not that kind of easy. But his head lifted. Nate crouched beside him and placed one hand lightly on the dog's chest. The heartbeat beneath his glove was strong and steady, a small drum under fur and bone. "Still here," Nate said. Talon exhaled through his nose. Linnea appeared in the doorway with a clipboard. "He's stable, not comfortable, but stable, which is more than I can say for half the humans involved." "That a diagnosis?" "Field observation. Maribel may be contagious." Nate almost smiled. Then the radio on the counter crackled. A dispatcher's voice came through, thin under static. "Black Fir conditions worsening. Visibility dropping. Search activity suspended pending weather review. Sheriff's office advising no further descent until morning." Talon heard it. His head snapped toward the sound. Then he tried to stand. The motion was too fast. His rear leg slipped. The blanket fell aside. Linnea crossed the room before Nate could move, bracing Talon at the shoulders. "No," she said firmly. "Absolutely not." Talon struggled once, not with panic, but with terrible purpose. Nate dropped to his knees beside him. He placed both hands on the shepherd's chest, feeling that heartbeat harder now, faster, like it was trying to answer a call no radio could carry. "I know," Nate whispered. Talon's eyes fixed on him. "I know you want to go back." The dog's breath trembled. "But if you go down, Caleb loses you." Nate swallowed, surprised by the burn in his throat. "And I lose you too." The words came out before he could make them smaller. Linnea looked at him, but did not speak. Talon stopped pushing. He did not relax. He only stopped fighting Nate's hands. For the first time, Nate did not ask loyalty to spend itself until empty. He did not say, "Push harder." He did not say, "Be useful." He did not say, "Finish the mission." He said, with one hand resting over that stubborn heart, "You need saving too." Outside, a gust of wind struck the clinic windows hard enough to rattle the glass. Nate stayed there until Talon's breathing slowed. When he finally rose, Harper was standing in the lobby. Her scarf was dusted with snow. Her face had gone pale. "Nate," she said. Something in her voice made his stomach drop. He reached inside his jacket. The USB was still there. He pulled out the evidence bag. Still sealed. Still black. Still small. Harper took it from him, opened her laptop on the reception counter, and slid the drive into a port using an adapter from her bag. Nate stood behind her. Linnea watched from the exam room doorway. The folder opened. Empty. Harper clicked again. Nothing. She checked properties. Reformatted recently. No files. No hidden volume she could immediately see. Nate stared at the screen. For a moment, he did not understand. The drive was in his sight. The bag had been sealed. His jacket had been closed. The world refused to arrange itself into sense. Then Harper lifted the evidence bag and turned it under the light. "This isn't the same drive." Nate's mouth went dry. "It looks the same." "It isn't." Harper pointed to a tiny scratch near the metal edge. "I photographed the original. This mark wasn't there. Someone swapped it." The clinic seemed to narrow around him. No broken glass, no struggle, no dramatic theft. Just a truth replaced by a blank thing wearing its shape. Nate went outside at once. His truck sat where he had left it. The door was closed. No window broken, no obvious damage. But when he checked the handle, he saw a faint smear where snow had been brushed away and frozen again. The lock had not been forced in any crude way. Whoever had opened it knew how to leave almost nothing behind. Harper stood a few feet behind him. "You stopped here before making the copy," she said. He did not answer. "Nate." "I know." The shame arrived without mercy. He had done exactly what Harper warned him against. He had treated evidence like a burden only his hands could protect. He had turned away from process, from witnesses, from shared responsibility, because some old part of him still believed alone was safer. Alone had once helped him survive. Now it had become a cellar with no exit. By late afternoon, Denny Ashcroft summoned him to the county maintenance office. Denny stood behind his desk in a gray sweater, county jacket hanging cleanly on the coat rack behind him. A yellow waterproof folder lay open on the desk like a small official wound. "You were instructed not to act independently," Denny said. "I recovered potential evidence connected to a missing person. You removed materials from a private storage unit without notifying Sheriff's Office first." With Harper Vale present. A reporter is not law enforcement. Nate said nothing. Denny pushed a form across the desk. "You are suspended pending review. Turn over your plow keys, radio, and route tablet." The room was too warm. That made it worse. Nate placed the items on the desk one by one. Keys, radio, tablet. Each small sound felt larger than it should have. Denny's voice lowered. "This isn't personal." Nate looked at him. Denny seemed older than he had at the Ravine. Not kinder, just more tired. "You think I'm trying to bury this? I'm trying to keep this county from adding another casualty to that mountain. Caleb may already be one because we waited." Denny flinched just slightly. Then the office window rattled under a gust of wind. Both men looked toward it. The second storm had arrived. By evening, Black Fir Pass vanished from public view behind road closure signs and blowing snow. The orange markers Maribel had tied below the slope were likely buried. The fabric scrap was safe in a bag, the photos safe in Harper's files, Talon safe under Linnea's hold. But Caleb was not safe. No one could say that. Nate went home after dark because there was nowhere else he was allowed to go. His house felt smaller than usual. The single chair waited at the kitchen table. The heater clicked and complained. Snow pressed against the windows with the soft persistence of something patient and unwelcome. He took off his jacket and found his phone heavy in the pocket. There was an old voicemail saved there. Marin. He had not meant to listen to it. He had listened to it dozens of times. Her voice filled the kitchen, clear and tired. "Dad, I don't need you to be perfect. I just need you to answer. That's all. Just answer me sometime." The message ended. The house kept breathing its cold little breaths. Nate sat down slowly. For years, he had believed silence protected people from the worst parts of him. If he did not speak, he could not say the wrong thing. If he did not reach out, he could not pull anyone into the storm he carried. But silence was not a wall around pain. It was a room without heat, and the people who loved him had stood outside that room until even love had to step away to survive. His phone buzzed. "Harper?" He answered on the second ring. "I found something," she said. No greeting, no softness. Caleb backed up encrypted files to an old email account. "I can see the account name in one of the draft complaints, but I can't open the recovery without the prompt." "What prompt?" "The first dog, Summit Mercy's first search dog. The security question says, 'Name of the first dog who brought us home.'" Nate closed his eyes. He saw the clinic bulletin board, the faded photograph, the shepherd mix in snow. The black marker beneath it. He was not sure enough to say it. "Linnea might know," he said. "She remembers part of it. Maribel is with her now." There was a pause, then Harper added, "Maribel said something strange." "What?" "She said maybe Caleb didn't leave all the evidence in machines. Maybe he left some of it in Talon's memory." Nate looked toward the dark window. Outside, the storm covered the world in white. Inside, for the first time that day, the emptiness did not feel final. It felt like a locked door. And somewhere, maybe, a dog still remembered the key. By morning, Black Fir Pass had disappeared from the map of ordinary men. The road signs were still there. The mile markers still stood somewhere beneath white ridges and wind-packed ice. But the pass itself had become a thing belonging to the storm, a pale kingdom where sound traveled strangely, and every tree seemed to lean in, listening. Maribel found the alternate route just after sunrise. She spread an old topographic map across the counter in Linnea Hartwell's clinic, pinning its corners down with a coffee mug, a roll of gauze, Nate's flashlight, and a bottle of antiseptic. Blue elevation lines curled over the paper like frozen fingerprints. Her gloved finger traced a path east of the main ravine, around the blocked slide zone, through a narrow shelf beneath the fir ridge. "It's ugly," she said. Nate stood across from her, arms folded, eyes on the map. "How ugly?" "Steeper, more exposed in two places. Less slide-loaded than the direct approach, but not friendly." "Mountains usually aren't." "No," Maribel said, "but some of them at least pretend over coffee first." Dr. Linnea Hartwell stood beside Talon's padded mat near the heater. The German shepherd was awake, head raised, ears forward. His right rear leg was wrapped and supported, and the fur along his chest had finally dried enough to show its deep black and gold again. He watched the map as if he understood men were trying, belatedly, to speak his language. Linnea did not look amused. "If that dog goes," she said, "he does not run, he does not climb, he does not pull anyone, and he does not become a symbol of human determination at the expense of his ligaments." Nate looked at her. "Understood." "I'm not finished." He closed his mouth. "Talon can walk only on level or near-level sections with support. On steep sections, he rides the sled. He indicates by scent, posture, and direction. If that leg starts shaking beyond what I like, he comes out. If he refuses, you carry him out. If you refuse, I sedate both of you and let Maribel drag the sled." Maribel, without looking up from the map, said, "I'd rather not drag Nate. He looks heavy and emotionally inconvenient." Nate gave her a flat look. For the first time in 2 days, Linnea almost smiled. Then the clinic door opened, bringing in a hard slice of cold air. Sheriff Owen Rusk stepped inside, stamping snow from his boots. He was 60, broad in the body, slow in the way of men who no longer wasted motion to impress anyone. His silver hair was cut close, and a short white-gray mustache gave his face the look of an old courthouse lion carved from weathered oak. He wore a brown sheriff's jacket over a navy sweater, and in one hand he carried a dented steel thermos. He took in the room: map, dog, veterinarian, rescue tech, suspended snowplow driver. Then he set the thermos on the counter. "All right," Owen said. "Tell me why I shouldn't call this off before Denny gives himself a stroke." No one spoke for half a second. Then Maribel pointed to the map. "Because the direct route is blocked, but this eastern shelf gives us a controlled descent to the lower seam. Talon indicated that area before the slide. We found fabric. Caleb Rourke has been missing roughly 24 hours. Temperature and wind reduce survival odds, but if he found a protected pocket, there's still a chance." Owen looked at Linnea. "And the dog?" "Medically limited," Linnea said, "but useful if you respect the limits." Owen looked at Nate last. Nate knew that look. The sheriff was not asking for passion. He was measuring risk. "I found the truck," Nate said. "I know where the guardrail break is, where the slide covered the first line, and how the wind was moving through the ravine last night. I'm suspended from county road work. I know that. I won't touch county equipment. But if you authorize me as a volunteer guide, I can help them read the ground." Owen studied him for another long second. "You understand this isn't your operation?" "Yes." "You follow Maribel on rope decisions?" "Yes." "You follow Dr. Hartwell on the dog?" Nate glanced at Talon. The shepherd held his gaze, unreadable and ancient as a judge in fur. "Yes," Nate said. Owen nodded once. "Then you come as a volunteer. Nothing more dramatic than that." It was not the speech a movie would have given them. No one swore to bring Caleb home. No music rose. No old warrior was handed back his sword. Instead, a sheriff wrote Nate's name on a volunteer response form, had him sign it, and made Maribel countersign the risk plan. Somehow, that made the whole thing feel more serious. The search team left within the hour. Maribel led in her rescue truck. Owen followed with 2 county search and rescue volunteers, both quiet men with avalanche probes, and the humble faces of people who knew snow could humble anyone more thoroughly. Linnea rode with Talon in the back of Maribel's vehicle, one hand resting near the dog's shoulder whenever the road jolted. Nate sat in the passenger seat, watching the mountains rise through the windshield like white-backed beasts. The plows had opened only part of the lower access road. Beyond that, they went on foot. The world became smaller immediately. Boots, rope, breath through wool, the creak of harness clips, the soft hiss of snow sliding over snow. Talon rode on a compact rescue sled over the first steep section, secured but upright enough to lift his head. He did not like it. His expression made that clear. If Dignity could file a complaint, Talon had already prepared 3 copies. "You're riding," Nate told him. "Doctor's orders." Talon stared ahead. "I don't like it either." Maribel, from the rope line, said, "Beautiful, 2 stubborn males learning public transportation." The slope curved east beneath the main ravine. This side of Black Fir was less wooded, and the wind had carved the snow into hard ridges. In places, the crust held. In others, it broke underfoot with a hollow cough. Maribel tested each section before letting the team cross. Owen moved behind them, not fast but steady, marking coordinates and relaying updates in a calm voice that made even bad news sound organized. Nate found that he trusted the sheriff's slowness. Not because it was easy, because it was honest. Halfway down the shelf, a gust struck across the ravine and brought with it the sound of something metallic clanging against rock. One of the volunteers' headlamps flashed red through the snow as he turned. The color cut into Nate's vision. For 1 second, the mountain leaned away. The red light became another red light. The wind became rotor wash. The cold became heat. Somewhere in the old dark of memory, a command returned, sharp and impossible. "Move! Leave it!" Move. Nate stopped. His hands closed around the rope. This time he did not pretend. "Give me 10 seconds, he said. Maribel stopped immediately. No questions, no pity. She planted her boots, held the line, and said, "You've got 10. Nate lowered his gaze to Talon. The shepherd was on the sled, head lifted, eyes fixed on him. Not alarmed, not confused. Present. Nate counted the second hand on his old watch. 1, 2, 3, wind, snow, rope, dog, 4, 5, Wyoming, 6, 7, Black Fir, 8, 9, here, 10. He breathed out. "I'm good." Maribel nodded once and moved again. No one made a ceremony of it. That was what saved him from shame. They simply gave him 10 seconds and then continued, as if asking for time to return to oneself was as ordinary as tightening a buckle. A little farther down, Talon changed. It was subtle at first. His nose lifted. His ears came forward. His body, tired as it was, gathered into focus. Linnea saw it and signaled Maribel to slow. Nate crouched beside the sled. "What have you got?" Talon did not bark. He lowered his head, sniffed across the wind, then turned toward a cluster of rocks half buried beneath a drift. The formation sat under an overhang where fir roots gripped the slope like black fingers. Snow had blown over it in smooth layers, making it look sealed, untouched, harmless. Talon shifted, asking to stand. Linnea's face tightened. Only a few steps. Nate and Linnea helped him off the sled, keeping the sling under his body. Talon moved slowly, unevenly, but with dreadful certainty. At the edge of the rocks he lay down, not collapsed, placed himself. He pressed his nose to a narrow gap between two stones. Then he scratched once with his front paw. Lightly, again. Then he stopped. Maribel raised a fist. Everyone froze. The ravine held its breath. At first there was nothing, only wind slipping over the shelf, only Nate's heartbeat in his ears. Then from beneath the snow and stone came a sound. Tap, a pause. Tap, tap. Weak, human, rhythmic. Owen's voice dropped. "We have a response." The team moved with sudden precision. No panic, no shouting. Maribel marked the edges of the drift. Owen called coordinates. The two volunteers began clearing snow by hand and shovel, careful not to collapse the pocket. Linnea got Talon back onto the sled, despite the dog's clear opinion that the rescue would proceed more efficiently if everyone stopped being fragile about his leg. Nate dug where Maribel told him to dig. For once that was enough. Not lead, not control. Obey the rope, clear the snow, stop when told, listen. The opening appeared slowly, a dark slit beneath overlapping rock, protected from the worst of the wind by the angle of the shelf. Maribel lowered herself to it and called, "Caleb Rourke?" For a moment, nothing. Then a voice answered, so faint it seemed the mountain itself had whispered, "Here." The word moved through the team like a flame, passed hand to hand. They widened the opening carefully. Caleb was wedged in a shallow hollow formed by stacked stone and packed snow. His face was pale, lips cracked from cold, eyes heavy, but open. One leg was pinned awkwardly beneath a shifted pack and snow crust, but there was no visible severe injury. He wore a thermal jacket under a torn outer shell, and one gloved hand held a small metal tool he had used to tap the stone. Owen leaned close. "Caleb, I'm Sheriff Rusk. We're getting you out." Caleb's eyes drifted past him. "Dog," he rasped. Nate looked back. Talon was watching from the sled, entire body trembling with held purpose. Linnea hesitated, then nodded once. Nate brought the sled closer, stopping short of the hollow. Talon lifted his head higher, and something changed in Caleb's face. The exhaustion did not leave, but grief and relief moved through it like sunlight under ice. "Talon," Caleb whispered. Nate went still. The name did not belong to the scratched plate alone. It had lived in this man's mouth, in training fields and snow drills, in long drives, and maybe in whispered apologies when the organization began turning loyalty into inventory. Talon made one low sound, not a bark, not a whine, a sound from deep in the chest, old as recognition. The rescue took time, careful time, the kind that frustrates every desperate bone in a man but keeps people alive. Caleb had been in the hollow for roughly a day, protected from direct wind by the rocks and kept conscious by layers, a small first aid pouch, a little water, and the stubbornness of someone who had not finished telling the truth. When they finally lifted him onto a litter, Caleb's hand reached weakly toward Talon. Nate guided the dog's head close enough. Caleb's fingers touched the fur between Talon's ears. "Good boy," he breathed. Talon closed his eyes. Just once. Harper was not on the slope, but Owen allowed Maribel to place a brief call once Caleb was stable enough to speak a few words before transport. The phone was held near Caleb's mouth, wrapped in a glove to block the wind. "Harper?" Caleb whispered. "I'm here," her voice answered, thin and shaken through the speaker. "Back up," Caleb said. "Old email." "We found it. We need the recovery answer." His eyes moved to Talon, then toward Nate. "Juniper," he said. "First dog. Juniper." Linnea, standing beside the sled, bowed her head slightly. The faded photo in her clinic seemed to stand among them for a moment. A long-gone dog in snow, still guiding the living by the memory of her name. Harper said something Nate could not hear over the wind. Then the call ended. They carried Caleb out as the storm began to break into exhausted flurries. Not sunlight. Not yet. But the sky had loosened its fist. By the time they reached the lower access road, Harper had sent the first confirmation to Owen's phone and Linnea's clinic email. The encrypted backup had opened. There were transport lists, funding reports, photographs of collars and field codes. Chip records marked inactive, then billed as maintained. Dogs listed as available for future search readiness after they had been transferred away. And Graham Sutter's signature, neat and confident, appearing again and again beneath words that had sounded merciful until someone placed them beside the names. The truth did not arrive like thunder. It arrived like a ledger read aloud in a warm room while the storm stood outside, listening, line by line, name by name. Talon lay on the sled, exhausted, his injured leg protected, his eyes half closed. Nate walked beside him, one hand resting on the frame, not pulling, not pushing, only keeping pace. For the first time since Black Fir swallowed the truck, Nate allowed himself to believe Caleb Rourke might live. And for the first time since seeing those 3 worn letters on a frozen collar, he understood that Talon had not been guarding wreckage. He had been guarding a promise. Under the snow, beneath stone, inside erased files and tired hearts, the dogs who had died on paper were beginning to be called back by name. Caleb Rourke did not wake like a man in a miracle. He woke slowly, under white hospital blankets, with warm fluids running into his arm, and a nurse telling him not to try sitting up, as if she had already explained this to him 4 times. His lips were cracked from the cold. His voice came out thin and rough. His eyes, though, were clear enough to search the room before he asked for water. Then, before he asked about the investigation, before he asked how long he had been missing, he asked, "Where's Talon?" Nate stood near the window, arms folded, watching snow fall against the glass. He had not planned to be there when Caleb woke. He had told himself he was only delivering a message from Linnea, only checking with Sheriff Owen, only making sure the man they had pulled from the hollow still had a voice. Lies, he had learned, were not always large enough to be dangerous. Sometimes they were small enough to fit comfortably in a coat pocket. "He's at Linnea's clinic," Nate said. "Stable." "Mad about it?" Caleb closed his eyes. A faint smile moved across his face, so tired it barely survived. "Sounds like him." That was all he could manage for a while. The hospital in High Ridge was small, more practical than pretty, with pale walls, humming lights, and a waiting room where coffee tasted like regret, filtered through cardboard. Outside, state vehicles had begun appearing in the parking lot. Not with sirens, not with drama. Just dark sedans and winter-coated officials carrying document bags through the snow. The truth, Nate thought, did not always arrive wearing armor. Sometimes it arrived with clipboards. By noon, Summit Mercy Search and Recovery was under formal review by state authorities, and federal investigators had requested copies of the funding records. Harper Vale's first report had not accused beyond what the documents supported. That was her discipline. She wrote cleanly, almost coldly, laying out what could be verified. Dogs listed under continuing care after transfer, chips marked inactive, medical records that did not match operational removal notes, and Graham Sutter's signature on repeated reports. Graham appeared on a regional news clip that evening. Nate watched it from the hospital hallway with Maribel and Sheriff Owen. Graham Sutter stood in front of Summit Mercy's Silver Mountain logo, wearing a black parka so clean it seemed personally offended by weather. His hair was combed back. His expression was grave. His voice carried the polished sorrow of a man who had practiced concern in mirrors. He spoke of administrative discrepancies. He spoke of budget pressure. He spoke of the difficulty of sustaining rural rescue capacity. He did not speak of Talon. He did not speak of Bishop, Lark, Echo, or the other dogs whose names had returned from Linnea's files like bells under ice. Maribel crossed her arms. He makes abandonment sound like a scheduling conflict. Owen took a slow drink from his dented thermos. That kind usually does. Nate said nothing. He had expected anger to feel hot. Instead, this anger felt clear. Cold glass, sharp enough to cut, but clean enough to see through. Denny Ashcroft was called in to explain his decisions 2 days later. There was no public humiliation, no dramatic apology in front of cameras. Denny sat in a county meeting room under fluorescent lights, his waterproof folder on the table, his gray county jacket hanging behind him. Owen attended. So did a state emergency management officer. Nate was asked to provide a statement, not as an employee, but as the first responder who had found the crash. Denny did not look at him much. He explained his concerns carefully. Whiteout conditions, unstable slope, unknown animal ownership, injury risk, liability exposure, lack of full search authorization. Much of it was true. That was the uncomfortable thing about Denny. He had not been entirely wrong. He had simply trusted the safest words more than the living signs in front of him. When asked whether a working dog's behavior should have triggered specialist evaluation sooner, Denny hesitated. It was a small hesitation, but in that room it sounded like snow cracking. "Yes," he said at last. "In hindsight, yes." Nate did not feel triumph. He had imagined, perhaps, that hearing Denny admit even that much would release something in him. It did not. Real life was poor theater. The curtain did not fall on cue. Men did not transform because a sentence finally caught up with them. But procedures began to change. Working dogs found at active scenes would no longer be treated as ordinary strays before specialist review. Search indications had to be documented by qualified personnel. Decisions to suspend a search in severe weather required more than one signature when a live indication existed. Injured animals connected to rescue work had to be medically evaluated before transfer. It was not justice with a golden sword. It was policy. Thin paper, new ink, a door that would be harder to close next time. Nate found that he could live with that. Talon, however, remained legally complicated. Summit Mercy could still claim he had been program property. Caleb had started the process of taking him back from a private facility, but the paperwork had not been completed before the crash. Nate had found him, carried him, sat with him, argued for him, and nearly broken something inside himself listening to the dog's heart beat against his hands. None of that was ownership. Love, Nate was learning, did not make paperwork vanish. It only made the waiting harder. Linnea, Owen, and Caleb worked out a temporary care order. Talon would stay with Nate during recovery under Linnea's medical supervision, while investigators sorted ownership and Summit Mercy's claims were reviewed. Caleb, still too weak to handle the dog's care, signed his support from the hospital bed with a hand that shook slightly over the paper. "He chose you too," Caleb said. Nate looked at him. "He never stopped being yours." Caleb's eyes moved toward the window where snow softened the world beyond the glass. "No," he said quietly, "but maybe dogs have more room in their hearts than we do." Nate did not know what to say to that. Fortunately, Talon arrived before silence could become another locked room. Linnea brought him to the hospital side entrance because she refused to parade an injured dog through the lobby for the benefit of curious strangers. Talon wore his support harness, his rear leg wrapped neatly, and his old collar cleaned but not replaced. The metal plate still showed only Tal, though Linnea had tied a temporary tag beside it with his full name written in block letters. Talon walked slowly, supported by Nate on one side and Linnea on the other. When he entered Caleb's room, the whole place seemed to change temperature. Caleb turned his head. Talon stopped. For a moment, neither moved. Then the shepherd limped forward with careful dignity and placed his head on the edge of Caleb's bed. Caleb's hand came down over his neck. No one spoke. There are bonds that do not need speeches, because speeches would only make them smaller. Caleb's fingers rested in the thick fur behind Talon's ears. Talon closed his eyes. Nate stood at the foot of the bed and felt, strangely, no jealousy. Only the ache of witnessing something that had survived being erased. Caleb whispered, "You brought them home." Talon breathed out. That was answer enough. Weeks passed before the adoption became official. Not clean weeks. Not easy ones. Talon's recovery was slow. Some mornings his legs stiffened badly enough that he refused the back steps and glared at them as if they had insulted his ancestors. Linnea prescribed rest, controlled walks, therapy exercises, and patience. Talon accepted 3 of the 4. Patience remained under negotiation. Nate brought him to the rented house near the maintenance yard under temporary care first. The house did not know what to do with the dog. It had 1 chair at the kitchen table, 1 mug by the sink, 1 pair of boots by the door. It was built around absence the way some homes are built around fireplaces. Talon inspected every room with the seriousness of an assessor judging structural failure. He stood in the kitchen. He sniffed the cold hallway. He looked into Nate's bedroom, then back at Nate, unimpressed. "What?" Nate asked. Talon stared. Nate followed his gaze to the thin blanket on the bed, the unpatched draft under the window, the heater that clicked like an old man clearing his throat. "I've lived worse." Talon's expression suggested that was not a defense. The next day, Nate called a repairman to fix the heating system. 2 days after that, he bought a thick rug for the front room. He stood in the store for too long, holding 2 options, while a teenage clerk asked whether he needed help, and then wisely retreated from the look on his face. In the end, Nate chose a heavy brown rug with a soft pile because it seemed practical, not because he imagined Talon would like it. That was his story. Talon accepted the rug within 8 seconds. He walked onto it, turned once, lowered himself with careful grace, and settled his head on his paws with the solemn expression of a monarch approving a newly conquered province. Nate stared at him. Then he laughed. It came out rough, short, and rusty from disuse. The sound startled him more than it startled Talon. The dog opened one eye, mildly offended that his royal comfort had become entertainment. "Sorry," Nate said. He was not sorry. After that, the house began changing in small ways. A water bowl appeared by the back door. A bottle of joint supplements stood beside Nate's coffee tin. Linnea's written therapy schedule was taped to the refrigerator. The porch light, once burned out for months, was replaced. Nate started going to his appointments again, not because Talon healed him. Talon was not some mythical physician sent from the snow, carrying wisdom in his tail and medical degrees under his paws. He was a German shepherd with a bad leg, an old collar, a deep memory, and an irritating talent for standing in front of the door whenever Nate tried to leave a room angry. Healing did not arrive like spring. It arrived like physical therapy. Repetition, resistance, small motion, rest, again. On the evening the adoption papers finally cleared, Caleb called from rehab. His voice was stronger, though still thin around the edges. "He's yours now," Caleb said. Nate looked across the room. Talon lay halfway on the rug and halfway off it, because apparently conquest required expansion. "He's his own," Nate said. "I just handle transportation and food." Caleb laughed softly, then coughed. There was a pause. "Take care of him, Nate." "I will. And let him take care of you sometimes. He'll do it whether you approve or not." Nate looked at Talon, who had lifted his head at the sound of Caleb's voice through the phone. "I'm starting to understand that." After the call ended, Nate stood in the kitchen for a long while with his phone in his hand. Marin's number waited on the screen. He had written messages and deleted them. He had rehearsed explanations and hated everyone. He had considered saying nothing until he could say it perfectly, which was another way of never saying anything at all. Talon appeared in the doorway. He did not bark. He did not nudge. He simply stood there, blocking the exit with the calm authority of a creature who had once guarded a ravine and now guarded a man from his own escape routes. Nate looked at him. "You too?" Talon blinked. Nate pressed call. The ringing sounded impossibly loud. Once, twice, 3 times. Then Marin answered. "Dad?" Her voice was cautious, not cold, not warm. A door opened only as far as the chain allowed. Nate closed his eyes. For a second he wanted to explain everything. The storm, the ravine, Caleb, Talon, the investigation, the way a dog's heart had beaten under his hands like a small drum refusing winter. He wanted to give her a story large enough to justify the years he had failed to answer. But love did not need a report. It needed a beginning. "Hey, Marin," he said. His voice was rough. "I just wanted to tell you, I'm getting better. Not fast, but for real." Silence. Long enough that he thought the call had failed. Then Marin breathed in. "I'm glad you called," she said. That was not forgiveness in full. It was not the door thrown wide. It was only a line of light under it. But a man who had lived years inside winter knew what to do with a line of light. He stayed. Later that night, Wyoming remained white outside the windows. Wind moved through the pines with the deep, restless voice of an old beast that had not finished telling its story. The mountains stood dark beyond the yard, and Black Fir Pass lay somewhere in the distance, marked now not only by danger, but by the place where a promise had been kept. Inside the small house, the heater worked. The rug held Talon's weight. The porch light burned steadily over the snow. Nate sat at the kitchen table. The second chair had been pulled away from the wall. No one sat in it yet. That was all right. Some rooms had to learn space before they learned company. Talon lay near the door, his wrapped legs stretched carefully to one side, eyes half closed. But his ears remained tuned toward Nate, always listening, always keeping part of himself on watch. For the first time in many years, the house did not feel like a bunker waiting for night to attack. It felt like a place someone might return to. A place where a dog would wait. A place where the porch light stayed on until morning. Sometimes healing does not arrive as a thunderclap. Sometimes it comes quietly, through a dog who refuses to leave, a small light left on, or one honest phone call after years of silence. Nate and Talon remind us that being wounded does not mean we are finished. Even when life has buried our hope under snow, grace can still find a way through. And sometimes God sends help with tired eyes, muddy paws, and a heart loyal enough to lead us home. If this story touched you, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from, and consider subscribing to join us for more stories of courage, loyalty, and second chances. May peace find your home tonight, and may your own porch light stay on through every storm.